Afternoon. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. We have all assembled here to pay homage to our beloved scientist, Professor Thanu Padmanabhan, who breathed his last on 17th September morning. He was a legendary personality, one of the promising scientists of the country, an eminent theoretical physicist and cosmologist. His research area covers a wide variety of topics in gravitation, structure formation in the universe, and quantum gravity. He is a good friend and well-wisher of KSCSTE and guided our important research committees and participated in the Kerala Science Congress many times. KSCSTE is organizing 1 week long commemorative webinar series to pay homage to the legendary scientist of India, Professor Thanu Padmanabhan. And the webinar series is organized in association with Kerala University, MG University, Cochin University of Science and Technology, and Calicut University in Kerala. This program is attended by faculty members, researchers, and students in the physics department, as well as from other colleges, and also scientists from R&D institutions. Among the participants, our respected member secretary, Dr. Pradeep Kumar, is there. Respected Dr. MC Dattan, former PSSC director and scientific advisor to Chief Minister, Government of Kerala, and several scientists are there, professors are there. Honorable Vice Chancellor, just now he has joined. So today the webinar starts, that is today it is the second day in the commemorative lecture series. It starts with a welcome and introduction by Dr. Vijay Kumar, Senior Scientist of KSCSTE, followed by presidential address by Professor Sabu Thomas, Honorable Vice Chancellor of Mahatma Gandhi University, then commemorative lecture by distinguished Professor Shankar Narayanan, Department of Physics, IIT Bombay, and then vote of thanks by Professor K. Indulekha, Professor and in the School of Pure and Applied Physics, Mahatma Gandhi University. So now may I request Dr. Vijay Kumar to formally welcome the gathering.
Good afternoon, sir. The President of this function, Professor Sabu Thomas, respected MC Dattan sir, respected Member Secretary of the KSCSTE, Dr. Pradeep Kumar, Professor Shankar Narayanan from IIT Bombay, Vice Chancellors of other universities, faculties of universities, directors and scientists from R&D centers, students, and other scientists of KSCSTE, and my dear friends. KSCSTE is conducting this week-long webinar series to pay homage to Dr. Thanu Padmanabhan, the eminent theoretical physicist and cosmologist who passed away on 17th September 2020. As you know, Dr. T.P. Thanu Padmanabhan was born in Thiruvananthapuram. He earned his BSc and MSc from the College of University. He joined the Tata Institute of Fundamental Research for his PhD, and then he moved on to Inter-University Center for Astronomy and Astrophysics in 1992. There he served as Dean, and he became the distinguished professor there. In an academic career spanning 44 years, Thanu Padmanabhan had written about a dozen of books, 300 research papers, and also he wrote 16 textbooks for students. Along with his wife, Dr. Vasanthi, he authored the popular book Dawn of Science in 2019, and that was translated into many languages. He was also adjunct faculty to many Indian institutions, chief faculty to many foreign institutions. And I am humbly remembering that he was the first chairman of the NAD committee, Scheme for Augmentation of Research and Development in KSCSTE, during 2005 to 2008. He was the first chairman of the SAD committee here. And I have been experienced with his vision and insight in promoting scientific research. KCST is conducting this program in association with the universities in Kerala. Today is the second day of this webinar series. Professor Sabu Thomas, Vice Chancellor Mahatma Gandhi University, is presiding over this function. Professor Sabu Thomas is an eminent academician and researcher working in the area of macromolecular science and green composites for a wide range of technological applications. He is having more than 1,000 publications. He edited about more than 158 books, supervised 115 PhD students, granted with 4 patents and filed another 11 patents. He is the chief editor of Nanostructure and Nano Objects, a several publication, and cited among the top 10% scientists in India by Stanford University professors. After his PhD at IIT Kharagpur, Professor Sabu Thomas joined Mahatma Gandhi University as a lecturer, and he became the Vice Chancellor of this university in 2019. In spite of his busy schedule, he readily accepted our invitation to preside over this function. On behalf of the KCST, wholeheartedly, we welcome you, sir, to this function.
Thank you.
Today, Professor Shankar Narayanan, Department of Physics, IIT Bombay, is with us to deliver the commemorative lecture on Dr. Thanu Padmanabhan's contributions. Professor Shankar Narayanan did his PhD with Professor Thanu Padmanabhan at IUCAA, and it is a great honor for us to invite you to deliver this commemorative lecture. With a great pleasure and proud, I welcome you, sir, to this function. Professor K. Indulekha, School of Pure and Applied Physics, Mahatma Gandhi University, is here to propose word of thanks. Sincerely, I welcome to you this function. Many members from universities, R&D centers, colleges, students from colleges and schools, and scientists from different institutions and from KCST for attending this function. On behalf of the KCST, I wholeheartedly welcome all of you to this function. Once again, I am welcoming all of you to this webinar series today. Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Over to Presidential Address, Honorable Vice Chancellor, Mahatma Gandhi University, Professor Sabu Thomas. Sir, please.
Very good afternoon to all of you. Can you all hear me? Can you all hear me?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yes, yes.
Respected Dr. Pradeep Kumar, our distinguished speaker today, Professor Shankar Narayan, Dr. Dattan, Dr. Vijay Kumar, my colleague, Professor Indulekha, all my academic fraternity, and my dear students. Let me first express my heartfelt condolences to the family and to the colleagues and friends of our great Thanu Padmanabhan, whom I met several times in many meetings. I had close interaction with him, so many programs. Even my first SART project was evaluated by him. I presented before him. He was a SART chairman. I was one of the first to make a presentation for the SART project from Mahatma Gandhi University. And I remember I presented my project before him. And we had lots of discussion. And he told me how we are going to implement SART project. And he, during the discussion with him, he said, he called me Sabu. Sabu, you must encourage young students, brilliant students to this project. Professor Thanu had his education in Kerala, born in 1957, and untimely death at the age of 64. He had his UG and PG from University of Kerala. And he told me once, he was so active in Trivandrum Science Society. And he told me, Sabu, why don't you start something similar in Kottayam? Once we were discussing, and why don't you inculcate scientific temper among our young students? Dr. Thanu had a brilliant academic. first time holder in BSc and MSc. And he told me during his BSc time, he had the opportunity to publish a paper. And he used to like fantastic lectures given by brilliant physicists. And he told me whenever there is a conference symposium in Trivandrum, he used to attend that. And he had a scientific temper. And after his MSc, he went to TFR, had his PhD, and he told me he stood to Cambridge and Oxford. And then he has taken up a very important assignment to develop Inter-University Center for Astronomy and Astrophysics. I remember our education minister, Mr. Baby, went to Pune and had several rounds of discussion with Professor Tanu, because we started Inter-University Centers in the state of Kerala. And Mr. Baby was inspired by Professor Tanu in starting Inter-University Centers in the state of Kerala. You know, NGO has now 8 Inter-University Centers to interact with the rest of the world. If you look at Tanu's contribution, outstanding, more than 300 publications, several books. And I request all the young students to read his book on story of physics, a fantastic book. And he has done outstanding contribution to gravitation, cosmology, quantum gravity, fluid dynamics. And he got so many awards and recognitions. One time I thought, he would definitely getting a Nobel Prize. He was such a brilliant person. He received Bhatnagar Prize. He received Padma Shri. He received Infosys Prize. And he was invited for Infosys lecture series, which I attended. Tanu's lecture, Infosys Science Foundation lecture series has given. And Professor Tanu was great passion for science. And he also worked very hard for popularization of science. One time he told me he wanted to start a sort of mentorship program. You know why? To attract young people towards science. And he said he was not very happy with the Indian system of education system. He said we have to really change our education system, then only we will get Nobel Prize. And he said, whatever money he has, he will definitely start a sort of mentoring program to attract young people to science. So I request KSCST, under the leadership of KSCST, you must start some sort of program for attracting our youngsters to science, maybe a mentoring program. That is one of the dreams of, Professor Tanu. A sort of mentoring program to attract young students to science, so that he said innovation, critical thinking could be generated. And I request probably in Mahatma Gandhi University, probably we will definitely start a chair to commemorate the great contribution of Professor Tanu on gravitation, cosmology, fluid dynamics, and quantum gravity. I'm sure we should propagate the philosophy, the dreams of Professor Tanu. And I'm sure all our academics, university heads, KSCST should leading step to fulfill the dreams of Professor Tanu, attracting youngsters to science. Thank you so much. I express my heartfelt condolences to the family of Tanu, his wife and daughter. Once he told me he found his wife during his academic career, and all are in the same field. I mean, his cosmology, gravitation, and quantum gravity. Thank you so much. Thank you for inviting me for this giving this presidential address.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for your most valuable and inspiring speech. Thank you so much. Now let us all hear to the words of wisdom from Professor Shankara Narayanan. Sir, please.
Hello.
Yeah. Professor?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, Professor Shankara Narayanan, yeah.
Yeah, is everybody could see the screen?
Yes, yes.
You can see the slides.
Yes,
You
yes.
can see the slides. Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. First, I would like to thank Kerala Science and Science Council for inviting me, and more importantly, for organizing this memorial meeting. I'm very grateful for the Kerala Science and Technology Council for the same. So we are here discussing about Professor Padmanabhan's contributions in science, and especially in the last 40 years or so, what he has actually achieved. So, but this also reminds me of one of the famous statements of Charles Dickens in his book, The Tale of Two Cities. So the starting statement was, "This is the best of the times and this is the worst of the times." So, so the gravity, as we know because of Einstein's theory, it has been a very complicated theory to understand, and basically to understand what are the implications of it. The effects of gravity are actually seen in the last few years, especially in the last 10 to 15 years, has been phenomenal success for astrophysics, cosmology, and gravity, with the precision experiments, with high-end numerical simulations combined with theoretical framework. We are able to achieve some very unprecedented level of understanding of the universe. Fine. And so that basically is, and this is basically what we now consider as the starting of the Renaissance, and it is going to be going on for the next few years or decades itself. Now, then you hear this, the news of Paddy, who has actually been forefront in many of these area developments, especially in cosmology and black hole physics and quantum gravity. So in that sense, the event which we are right now here, actually, it reminds me of the Charles Dickens statements. Okay, so besides Paddy being a original thinker, actually one of the important features which I think not many people might know about is Paddy is very good at breaking any physics problem or even a general problem in life into small atomic units. And then what he does is he basically goes and finishes each atomic unit precisely such that then he will go to the next atomic unit. So to understand this, I will give you an anecdote of what I and Paddy had when I joined him as a PhD student. When I joined, he decided that he will write this 3-volume book on theoretical astrophysics in 3 years. Basically, each year he will write one book. So I asked him very naively, ask him, how will you be able to do it, or how are you going to do it? So he said in the casual manner, I will write 10 pages a day, and out of these 10 pages, 3 pages will definitely go in the book. So then if I do this for 150 days, I will have a book in 150 days, and the rest of the time I will try to furnish it better and make it better, and I will have a book in 1 year. So that's how he actually wrote the 3-volume book. Each year he could finish one. That doesn't mean that he has actually couldn't discuss with me physics or my PhD work. He was going on with it, but he was also able to do this. So in that sense, Paddy was able to do a lot of multitasking, and he was able to do these things precisely because he knew exactly what to do. So he knew that he has to write 10 pages a day, which is actually not easy in the sense writing 10 pages is not easy, but he will do it, and he will finish it in such a way that it will be done. Fine. So that basically tells what Paddy was and how he actually could do a lot of work. So what I plan to do today is a topic which Paddy actually spent a lot of time, last 20 years actually, on what is called the cosmological constant. And I've used the same title, which is Cosmological Constant, the Weight of the Vacuum, which is the title which he had written in 2003. This was 6 years after the discovery of the late time acceleration. And this is one of the well-cited papers of Paddy, which is almost close to 3,000 citations or so. So I am going to discuss this topic today. The reason why I chose the topic is basically because the understanding this cosmological constant is one of the main things which drove him to emergent gravity, and that's what he actually spent the last 10 years of his life. Fine. So now I just want to briefly give the audience the kind of research which Paddy actually did before I go into the topic.
Sir, may I interfere,
Sure.
sir? Pardon.
Yes.
Of course, many participants are asking for an introduction from your side. Of course, it is a slip from my side. I admit that. So just 1 minute, kindly bear with us to introduce the speaker, chief guest today. May I request Dr. Vijay Kumar to quickly introduce the speaker.
Yes, thank you, sir. So Professor Shankara Narayan did his PhD with Professor Thanu Padmanabhan at IUCAA during 1997-2002. After his PhD, he did his postdoctoral fellowship at DCTD University of Azores, Portugal, and at International Center for Theoretical Physics, Rieti, Italy. In 2006, he joined Albert Einstein Institute, Germany, as Max Planck Fellow. In 2007, he was awarded with the Marie Curie Fellowship, the Institute of Cosmology and Gravitation, Portsmouth, United Kingdom. In 2009, he joined as assistant professor at the Indian Institute of Science Education and Research, Thiruvananthapuram. Then he joined the Department of Physics, IIT Bombay, in 2017 as associate professor, and now he is working as a professor at IIT Bombay. He was awarded with the Ramanujan Fellowship from Science and Engineering Research Council India 2010, the INSA Young Scientist Award in 2010, Birla Science Prize in Physics in 2014, Homi Bhabha Fellowship Award in 2018-20. His essay received honorable mention in Gravity Research Contest by Gravity Research Foundation USA in 2018 and 19. Currently, he is the Institute Chair Professorship at IIT Bombay. Professor Shankara Narayan is having 82 publications in peer-reviewed international journals. He supervised 4 PhD students, 20 postdoctoral fellows, and currently 5 PhD students are working with him. Professor Shankara Narayan is an eminent scientist and actively conducting research in the area of early universe cosmology, black holes, quantum gravity, and quantum phase transition. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Vijay Kumar. Sorry, dear professor, for intervening. And back to you, sir.
Fine. Okay. Thank you very much. So let me. So to understand what Professor Padmanabhan or Paddy, whom we refer to, is research. So he basically, when you ask him what research he does, this is what he always says: I am interested in any aspect where Newton's constant is non-zero. So this is what his punchline was. Basically, this tells us that he was not restricted to some specific aspect of research, but he was interested in wide breadth and breadth of physics in general, and that's basically what defined his research itself. So I have kind of divided his research into 4 epochs, and I have put it in chronologically from the bottom to up, which basically coincides with the way we understand the universe right now. Which is he is PhD, and during his TFR time, he was primarily focused on early universe, very close to the inflation or very close to the Big Bang, and that is basically the first 3 minutes of the universe. And then in 1990 to 2000, he was primarily interested in how the stars were formed, how the structures were formed. And this is a topic which in tomorrow's speaker, Tirthankar Rai Chaudhary, will be discussing mostly. And what Sriram Kumar discussed was in the first epoch. What I will be talking about is basically the late universe, where he spent a lot of time in 2001 to 2010 to understand the dark energy, or what he called it as cosmological constant and the weight of the vacuum. And in the fourth epoch, where he was interested in the emergent properties of gravity. And this is what the last day Professor Dawood Kotawala will actually discuss about. So today, as I mentioned, I will be talking about the dark energy or the cosmological constant, and which is also referred to as the is called the mystery of the millennium problem. Okay, fine. So before I proceed, I just want to give a brief overview of, and so that to know what the audience will be expecting. So since I know that the audience here is going to be a little diverse, I was thinking that I will keep it simple without having many equations, so that then I will carry them with me all along. So I will start with what we understand and what we really know about the universe, and what are the predictions of the model and how does it fare with it, and what are the current challenges in cosmology, because this is important, because as students who are attending, students basically should not think that everything is done and nothing else is left for them to do. There are lots of challenges which are there. So I'm going to spend some time, last 20 minutes or so, what are the challenges and what people have understood and what Professor Padmanabhan actually tried to understand, and where we are actually still lacking. And then I will end the presentation with the summary of what I briefly discussed. Okay, so let us just understand where we are and how did we come through. So we all have seen the sky during the day, and this is a beautiful sky. Trivandrum has a nice sky, and this is the sky in the night. And this is a Chile. This is in ESO in the southern hemisphere. This is taken by the Chile in Chile. So we have seen this, almost every one of us have seen this every day. Most of the time, if it is a gray sky, of course you will not see this, but it will be there. Fine. So we all know about this, and we see that, okay, during the day we have a bright and sunny day, and during the night we basically disperse things, and there will be some stars, you will see it. Fine. And so this is what we always see. So Olbers in 1823 actually asked the following question, which I think at that time everybody thought he was a little crazy. Okay, so they asked the question. He asked the following question: why is the night sky dark? And people thought it was a crazy question, and people didn't have a clear answer, because he, with the physics knowledge or the scientific knowledge at that time, he actually proved that if the night sky should actually be uniformly bright, and that turned out to be what is referred to as an Olbers paradox. And this paradox seemed to be a paradox for more than 100 years, until Hubble actually showed that that it is not a real paradox, because if the universe is expanding, then it is the Olbers paradox will be solved. So I think, so this actually tells us something very important. Although you may not have an answer right now, you might actually ask the right question, and maybe 100 years later somebody else can actually figure it out. This also points out to what Paddy was doing. Paddy was doing emergent gravity and lot of things we don't understand yet, but possibly in the future, in the next 30 to 40 years, we might, with a lot of experiments and observations coming up, we might actually be able to get something really done. Fine. So this is actually something which is important to know. So that's where I thought I'll start with this. So what is Olbers' argument, and where is the problem? So to go about understanding Olbers, let us consider candles. So I assume two sets of candles, a set of candle which I keep it close to me, and another set of candles which I keep it very far. Fine. So from observations, I have assumed that all the candles are of the same, the sense it emits the same amount of light. So that is the assumption which I'm going to make. And this is an assumption which we keep making it, because that makes calculations a little simple. Otherwise, we have to really do a slightly non-trivial calculation. So in the language of physics, or in any literature, we define the candle by an intrinsic luminosity, which is basically defined as how much of energy. This is energy, basically it's light. So it is sending some amount of light. So we are asking how much energy it is emitting per unit time. So basically, if I have the same set of candles, then the energy emitted here and the energy emitted by this light will be the same by these two set of candles. But if one candle is far away, I know that it is actually dimmer. So it is dimmer because we are receiving less amount of light from it, and it is spread it out in a much farther region. So basically, if I am sitting there, if the candle is there, and if you draw a sphere of 4 pi radian and with the radius r, so it is spread across with a larger radius compared to this, which is spread across with a smaller radius, and that radius I call it as d. So which is basically d is the distance. So the flux which we see is very small. So basically, luminosity divided by 4 pi d square helps us that as the farther the object is, the flux is less. That's the reason why it appears dimmer to us. Fine. So this is important, and this is what we are going to carry through for the next 10 to 15 minutes or so. Fine. So let us ask a question. What did Olbers made an assumption? This was 1820. So please remember, we didn't know many things about atoms itself. We didn't know anything. We didn't have quantum mechanics. We didn't have anything. We didn't have special relativity. We didn't have anything. So what Olbers made two assumptions, which I think that time it was considered to be correct. So he said that the universe is static. Basically, universe is not moving. Nothing is happening in the universe. It's like as if static. It's like what we see as a wood. Wood is a static object according to us, or in the room is supposed to be a static object. But we know that there are a lot of particles which are just jumping each other in the universe, in the room. So similarly, he basically did that. So he assumed that the universe is static, and the assumption which he made is that the universe was infinite in the sense it is very far. So since assumption is that these all distant galaxies are very far, so he assumed that it is infinite. So what are the consequences? So the consequences are, if it is infinite, basically we should be able to see a star with a very good telescope. For instance, let us assume that there is a very good telescope that time. So we should be able to see any star very far away in any direction. That is the assumption which he made. Then he said that if it is static, which basically means the universe is static, then basically the only effect is like what we did in the case of a candle in the previous slide. This will be only dimmer by a 4 pi d square. This is what we made an assumption. Fine. So then we can ask a question: how will the night sky look if you make this assumption? And this is what people actually did, and that's where it was called a paradox for 100 years. So look and see this. This is sun, and then what he did is he just accumulated and put it on top of each other and calculating the the flux from each and every galaxy or the galaxies and stars. And then he showed that the actual night sky should actually be even brighter than the day sky. This is what he actually proved. So what he showed is that if you take these two assumptions, then the night sky should not be dark. In the sense, it should not be this thing. It should be uniformly bright, and then basically that's where it was called the Olbers paradox. So then the question is, so people didn't know how to solve this. So, and it was remained as an Olbers paradox for the last 100 years, for next 100 years actually. Fine. So now we know that the Olbers paradox can be, we know that it is not true. We see that this is so. Now let us ask a question: how do we go about solving the problem? So one way to problem is to relax the assumption of Olbers. Olbers made two assumptions. One is basically that universe was infinite and universe was static. Fine. So let us relax one assumption. Let us assume that the universe was actually expanding. And so what happens if the universe is expanding? So the distance between the star and us increases because of the expansion. So it is not that if I measure the distance at time t equal to t0 now, and let's ask a question: what is the distance? And if that distance would have become increased as we keep increasing the time. So basically that's what actually I have shown it in this cartoon. Because of the fact that the universe is expanding. Now, if I go back in time, then what happens is that the universe is actually shrunk. As we keep going back in time, it will keep shrinking and it'll actually become smaller and smaller in size. Or if I go farther away from us, like if I go to future in time, it actually keeps increasing, and it actually becomes larger and larger. Fine. So one of the consequences that if it keeps expansion happens, then we will receive less light. So why will receive less light? Because if you remember, there is a flux which is 1 by d squared. Now the d squared is not a constant distance; it's actually d squared of t. So hence the distance keeps decreasing. Hence the flux reduces. Now what happens is that because of the fact that the universe is expanding, the universe also becomes finite. The reason why it becomes finite is because as we go back in time, if you keep reducing the time, now it will be smaller and smaller distance. Now the balloon is shrinking smaller and smaller, and now it will become a very small balloon of very small size. So what happens? So basically what happens if the universe is finite, then the distant light could not have reached us because it has taken a finite time for the light to come, because we know that this speed of light is finite. So it is not infinite. So it will be taking a finite time to reach us. So not all the light from all the galaxies would actually reach us in a finite time. So basically, the assumption which Olbers made, that universe is expanding, universe is static, and universe is infinite, it actually can be rectified by just relaxing one assumption, saying that universe is not static, universe is expanding. then what it basically tells us that the only way to solve Olbers paradox is basically that the universe is not static; it is actually expanding. Fine. So this is what I mentioned. So the flux now becomes a function of time. So it becomes d squared of t. So that basically means that the distances is increasing, because of which the flux is actually reduced. And hence what we showed in the previous picture, basically saying that there is going to be uniformly distributed light at night. It's not going to happen because the flux is actually reduced. So the distances have increased, and hence this is effect. So there are two important consequences happens because of the fact that the universe is expanding. The flux decreases, and the second thing which actually interesting happens is basic what we now in the day-to-day we call it as Doppler effect. And let me just explain what happens. So we all have seen this ambulance siren. When it comes close to us, we hear the frequency increase, and we see that after it goes away, then the frequency decreases. But that's a relative effect because of the fact that there is a non-zero relative velocity between the source and the observer. And this is the famous relation between the Doppler effect, which is the nu which the person receives is different from what the source from the source, and the difference is basically because of this sound. The sound speed minus the source speed is actually non-zero. Fine. So to understand this, let us look at this picture. So basically, what happens when I have a source? When I have let us assume that there is a ambulance which is sending out the siren. What is happening is that it is actually sending the sound waves, and the sound waves are basically defined by the wavelength with the crest and the front. So when the source is stationary, so when the source is not moving, what happens is that the sound waves are distributed isotropically at the same distance everywhere. So the distance between the wave fronts is identical everywhere, and this is what we call it as and the frequency is the same for all observers. Now, here what I've shown is I've assumed that a source is moving towards the right for everybody. So now when the source is moving towards the right, now what is happening, as you can see, the distance between the wave fronts is in the right are shorter. So hence the frequency becomes larger, while the wave fronts on the left actually becomes slower. And that's basically what is an effect which we see when we see that the Doppler effect, which we see in the day-to-day life, is when the ambulance passes through us. There is when it comes close to us, the frequency increases, but when it goes away, this is what happens: the frequency decreases. But for the observer here and here, the frequency is going to be the same. It's not going to be different. Okay, good. So now this is the same effect which we actually see in cosmology, and it is what, instead of Doppler effect, we call it as a cosmological redshift. So because the fact that the redshift is changing, and so the frequency is changing, and that's the reason why we call it as cosmological effect. Fine. So now let us look at this. I have a star or a galaxy, and the galaxy is emitting some light because it's emitting in different frequencies. So let us assume that it is emitting in some electromagnetic wavelength, and this is what we see it as a spectrum. Okay, and this is what we see. And if this is not moving with respect to us, right? Now, so this is true because if the galaxy is very close to us, then we will assume that it is not moving, and then it will be basically what it will be emitted at that time. So for instance, star, for instance, it is not moving relatively from us in the cosmological scale. So hence we can assume what is the spectrum. We know what is the spectrum. Now, if this is a star or a galaxy which is very, very far away from us, now what we see is that the spectrum is actually getting redshifted. And it is the same kind of a relation which we saw with the Doppler effect. And we give a number Z, which I'll come back to it in a minute. So basically, nu emitted, which is the frequency emitted by the star or the galaxy, minus what we observe, divided by nu observed, is basically it's a number. And that number can go from 0 to infinity. And that Z is basically what we refer to as a redshift. So this is a very similar feature like what we see in the case of Doppler effect, and the only difference is that this is nothing to do with the sound, and this is to do with the electromagnetic light, and this is what we see because of the fact that there is an expansion. If the Z is positive, that basically means that the galaxies are moving away from us. If Z is negative, actually which means that the Z is actually galaxies are coming towards us. We have always seen Z to be positive. Fine. So Z is an important quantity, and there is a lot of effort to measure galaxies, farther and farther galaxies, with a bigger and bigger telescope to measure this. Fine. So this is basically a cartoon, which is shown here with a picture of Hubble. He was the first to measure these distant galaxies. He measured it for almost close to 10 years. Okay, different galaxies. I'll show you the plot in the next few slides. And then what he found is a very interesting feature. So there are some galaxies which can be, which is what is called the local expansion. Locally, there will be going towards us, but that is not the most important. As what he found is that the farther galaxies which are there, those galaxies are actually moving away from us, and that he could actually measure. So, and this is what is now called it as the Hubble measurement, and he measured it from 1920s onwards to 1930s. Right? Okay. So, what did he measure? So, basically, what he measured is he measured the velocity in which this is the left plot is basically what Hubble measured, and this is the new plot which is measured by the Rees and et al. I'll come back to it in a minute. So what he measured is the following: he measured the velocity of these galaxies which are moving away from us, and this is plotted as kilometers per second, and this is the distance of these galaxies. In cosmology and astrophysics, parsec is actually a good number. 1 parsec is roughly 3.26 light years. And 1 megaparsec is 10 to the power of 6 times that. So what he found is that he found these. Of course, this instrument is not very good, but he still managed to get these data, and he got this scattered plot. Now you will think that it is a very scattered plot. So what he did was something simple. He said that, okay, let me just plot fitting a straight line to this. He fitted a straight line, and then he said that the velocity of these galaxies is actually proportional to the distance, and there is a constant which is now referred to as the Hubble constant. So V is, so the farther the galaxy from us, faster the velocity of which it is actually going away from us. So V is equal to V is proportional to R, so which is H0. So this is the new, as you can see, the same kind of observations were done right now with better equipment, and it's actually the fitting is very good. Now this is all falls in a single line. Fine, okay. And so there is a lot of effort has been made to go into understanding this Hubble constant, which is referred to as a Hubble constant, because Hubble constant gives us the rough estimate of the age of the universe. So when we know H0 inverse gives us roughly the age of the universe, almost to the first decimal place, and that's where people have been making effort. So from 1920s onwards, this is what a large amount of effort has been made to really precisely know what is the value of H0, because that is important. Now, in the recently, different observations seems to give different H0 values. The ones coming from the closer supernova measurements seems to give a larger value. For instance, coming from, cosmic microwave background observation. So that is what is referred to as Hubble tension. If you type Hubble tension in Google, you will see lots of papers. People have been trying to understand. So that tells us that there is a smoking gun, which tells us that there is something which we don't understand. So I'll come back to this at the end of this when we come back to this. Fine. Okay. So we understand that there is observations tells us that there is a lot of evidence tells us that there is universe is expanding. So how do we put it in a mathematical framework? And that's where Einstein comes in. Einstein was the first to propose general theory of relativity, and so he did it in 1915. So before all these Hubble's measurements and things like that. So what he basically did was, in a very, very heuristic way, I can mention this. So this is what we have all seen in our BSc of solving Poisson equations for a gravitational system. If I have a rho mass, a density, mass density, and we know that it satisfies what is called the Poisson equation. There is a similar equation also for Coulomb potential, which is very similar to this. Okay. Now, so what he basically did is this. If you look at it, this is only as a spatial dependence, and we don't worry about the time dependency. So he basically converted this time-independent equations, like what Maxwell did, to a time-dependent equation, which is highly complicated, and it is also highly nonlinear. And these are set of 10 dynamical equations, and which is what referred to as the Einstein's equations. So to cut this long story short, the right-hand side is basically contains like a mass density. It includes all forms of density, like density, pressure, stresses, shear, everything goes into the stress, into the energy density. And the right hand side is what we call it as a curvature of the space-time geometry. Fine. One of the interesting features, which I think Einstein itself was surprised, is that the equations of general relativity naturally predicts an expanding universe, which is consistent with observations. Fine. So the first time where people proposed was Friedman and Lemaître, and this is also referred to as Friedman Lemaître Robertson Walker model. So this is Friedman and this is Lemaître, and they were the first to propose this. So what they did is, since the Einstein's equations are very complicated, they said, let us make it simple. So they assumed that the universe is homogeneous and isotropic, which basically means that there is no preferred observer position. Every observer in the universe will be the same treated. It's basically democratic. And isotropic means they look the same in all directions. Of course, if you know if you look at the sky, night sky, you know that it is not homogeneous and isotropic. So, but we know from lots of observations, this is an SDSS survey which is done, which has mapped 1 million galaxies in the universe, and this is very low redshift. As you can see, although locally it doesn't look homogeneous and isotropic, but if you go to farther distances away from us, then the universe looks very homogeneous and isotropic. So the assumption which they made is still it holds true in a very large distance, but in the local distance, of course, it doesn't locally it doesn't make sense. Fine. So they made this assumption, and what is now referred to as a Friedman-Robertson-Walker line element. This is also called in the colloquial. This is called the Big Bang model, and this is the line element. This tells you how the two space-time points are expanding or changing with respect to each other. T is basically the cosmic time, and T is equal to 0 is when the Big Bang happened. And we don't know what happened at Big Bang and what happened before Big Bang, so we don't worry about it. So we only say when we say our birthday starts when we were born on some day. So it's basically the universe was born on some day, and we call it as T equal to 0. Every other thing is measured with respect to that. And A of T is what is an expansion factor. It tells you how the universe is expanding, and dx squared is basically dx1 squared plus dx2 squared plus dx3 squared, or dx squared plus dy squared plus dz squared, which is the expanding space. I will not discuss more about the line element, but we will just move on to it. So there is a mathematical framework which we can do. So now let us ask a following question. How do we explain the expansion of the universe? So the expansion of the universe can be applied by using the Hubble's law, which tells you that it also gives you the same explanation by looking at theoretically, it automatically gives us the Hubble's law expansion, which tells you that the velocity of the galaxies which are moving away from us is proportional to the distance. So now if you run the clock back, so the universe, as I mentioned, is going to be smaller and smaller size. And what is going to happen is that as we go to smaller and smaller size, the temperature of the universe is going to increase, and the temperature increases with the factor of A by T. So basically, if T0 is the current temperature, and we know that very well now, it's roughly 2.7 Kelvin, and if it go back, then the temperature keeps increasing with respect to A of T. Please remember, T is equal to 0 is bad, and that is when the Big Bang happened. So we cannot do anything close to T equal to 0, but we do everything away from T equal to 0. Okay, so what are the other predictions? So what happens is that since the temperature is very hot, the universe, of course, the electrons and protons are not going to be coupled. They're all going to be thrown away. And this is a cartoon which I have shown here. So basically what happens is that the universe is very, very ionized. The electrons are not bound. Even if it gets bound, what happens is that the photon comes and hits it, because they are energetic photons. They can be X-rays, they can be ultraviolet. So they can get kicked and they will be moving out. And so it will be electrons and protons which are just be free ionized atoms, ionized particles, which will be present everywhere. Now, so basically what it tells is that the radiation, or basically the photon and the matter, are highly coupled. So what happens is that there will be two photons coming and eating each other. They will produce an electron-positron pair. Or when there is a radiation is there, when the photon and when the electron and the proton are combining to form hydrogen atom, then these photons can come and hit and kick the particle out, and then they will become ionized. Now, this is all true for a very early universe when there is ionized. But when we consider a temperature Z is equal to something like 1,500 or around 2,000, the universe actually cools down substantially, and the electron and proton now combines. And now this will not happen. Then this photon cannot come and hit each other very often. So then they will have a stable hydrogen atom which will be formed, and that's where many of the nucleosynthesis of higher elements happens, and very high elements happens because of other processes which happens. We will not get into that. So basically, that is what the thermal history of the universe is. And Peebles was the first to actually propose the thermal history of the universe. This was a paper which he had written in 1964, and he was awarded the Nobel Prize in Physics in 2019 for this plot, basically, where he said, please remember, he said a possible thermal history of the universe, but it actually turned out that it is actually the current history of the universe, and where he basically showed that the temperature cools down, and then there is a black body radiation spectrum which is seen, and which is what is referred to as the cosmic microwave background. And if people who have heard Professor Sriram Kumar's talk, where he had a discussion about the CMB yesterday, so he basically discussed about the CMB and what are the imprints which can have about the early universe. So this is an interesting plot which tells you that how different matters, for instance, this is radiation, this is matter, and this basically tells us that how the radiation density, how the matter density actually changes with respect to different times. And he said this is a possible thermal history, because he didn't know that was true, but now with several measurements, that possible is actually removed. It's only, this is what is referred to as a thermal history of the universe. And he was awarded the Nobel Prize in 2019. Fine. Okay. So I have given all the successes of Big Bang cosmology. But then what is the problems, basically? Okay. So to understand the standard model, but we need certain ingredients. Without that, we cannot understand them. Okay. So first of all, if this is a pie chart, which tells you if I have 100 particles, let's just call it as 100 particles. If I have to explain the universe, what it tells you that this, out of these 100 particles, only 5 of them can actually be what we see in our day-to-day life, what we call it as atomic matter, which is made up of protons, electrons, neutrons. Okay. Okay. So and radiation also included. Fine. Now, rest 95% consists of matter, which we don't understand. When we don't understand, I'll explain that in the next few slides. So, and we divide that into 2 parts. One is what we call it as a dark matter, and the other one we call it as a dark energy. So please remember, these are the names which are given to the objects, but we have no clear understanding of them. So we will explain what we understand, what we don't understand in the next few slides. So the problem with the standard model is that it is predictive, but the problem is that it needs ingredients in the universe. That is the matter and the energy. 95% of them, which we don't see it in the day-to-day, in the atomic, in the laboratories, or in this anywhere in the high energy labs as well. Fine. So these 95% is divided into 2 parts. One is basically what is called the dark matter, and I'll explain what does it mean by dominates the mass of the galaxies in the next few slides. And the other one, what is called the dark energy. And I will be spending a lot of time on dark energy, but not much of dark matter, but both are actually necessary to explain all the observations of the current cosmology. Okay. So although I have mentioned that these are the terms, but we have no information. We don't have clear understanding of what these dark matter or dark energy are made up of. So we know what the atomic matter are made up of, because we know that they are made up of protons, neutrons, and electrons, right? But we don't know what we call it as dark matter and dark energy, what are they made up of? And that's basically what I'm going to explain in the next few slides. So the next part, so we have understanding, we have good amount of understanding of cosmology, and we have very good mathematical model for it. But there are serious problems, and that is basically what I'm going to spend the next 20 minutes or so on this. So before I proceed, I just want to highlight, this is a cartoon of many of us have heard about this 5 men and an elephant. This basically tells us that people see different parts of an elephant, and they assume that that is basically what it is. That's the entire part of it. So this is basically what is the current state in cosmology. I'll explain this slowly. Each of us explore a small region of the elephant, and we think that this is what is the universe is, but actually it might be actually something else completely different. Okay, so let us understand what is it. So let me just now briefly mention what is dark matter is, and then I'll move on to dark energy. Fine. So what we refer to as a dark matter cannot be atomic matter, because atomic matter interacts with light. So basically, if I shine something, there will be an electron, it will be interacting with an electron, and the electrons will move from one orbital to another orbital and things like that, right? So the dark matter, so it cannot be, so if it is not atomic matter, so the dark matter is something which cannot absorb or interact with a detectable amount of light, because we don't know whether how is it. So the current understanding is that it doesn't interact with light, but it might be very weakly interacting. That's also possible. So then how do we know that dark matter exists? Because any form of matter, according to Einstein, any form of matter should actually gravitate. So for instance, E is equal to mc squared is this famous equation where he said that mass and energy are interchangeable, and that basically made the foundation stone for general relativity. For instance, if you look at gravity, Newton's form of gravitation, Newton's form of gravity assumes that if the two masses only can interact. For instance, photon cannot be interacting in the presence of gravity. But that changed after the Einstein's equation of E is equal to mc squared, where he said that any form of mass can actually have energy. And since E and m are interchangeable, then he said that even photons should actually interact. And that we know very well now with the gravitational lensing and other effects, saying that energy and mass are, so basically photon interact with gravity. And so what we know is that if they have a mass, then the only way they have it is if they have energy or mass, then they interact gravitationally. Fine, good. So these are the only two things we have. So then how do we know that the dark matter existed? So what people have measured from 1930s onwards, that they look at the rotation speed of a star, or a material, I've called it here, but it's a star. So let us take, I have a star somewhere, this is a galaxy, and there are so many stars around it. Now what we can do is we can keep measuring each and every star which is going around this galaxy and ask a question, what is the rotation speed? Basically, what is the velocity? And we know this from the standard Newtonian mechanics, v squared of r is equal to gm by r. That's basically we know it. So you just we just measure it and ask a question, what is the rotation velocity of each of these galaxies? And then plot it as a function of distance. So this is the rotation velocity on the y-axis. On the x-axis is basically the distance in light years. Now, what people have measured is in the white curve, which is here, and the red curve is basically what is calculated. So we can calculate it by this simple expression, right? So because we know this many galaxies, this many stars are around, so we can make a conservative estimate of how much will be the masses, and you estimate it, and then that would give you a velocity, and you plot that as a function of distance. Fine. So what you see is that what people have noticed is that this profile looks to be similar till as we see up to this. For instance, this is actually superimposed on the galaxy to get a visual understanding of it. So till this point, there seems to be a perfect match, which is basically telling that we are able to see these stars and other objects around it in this galaxy. But after this, there are not many stars around it. But then that's where our theoretical estimate fails, because whatever we see is what we actually assume as mass. And that's where it actually goes down. But actually what you see is this measured quantities here. Fine. So there is a large discrepancy. It is not an instrumentation or observational error. It is actually a discrepancy between the theoretically calculated value and what is measured. We have now measured very high precision using very high precision. The number seems to be the same. It's roughly 10 times the mass, roughly. So what Zwicky was the first to propose this. So he said that, let us say that, okay, so there should be a mass because of which only the stars are able to see this. So that implies there is some mass which we don't directly see, and that is the reason why it is called dark. Why it is called dark matter, because we don't see it, observe it in the electromagnetic spectrum. So that's where we call it as a dark matter. So what he's proposed is that the only way to explain is that the mass of the galaxy should increase linearly with the radius. So if it linearly increases, then the velocity profile will become almost like a constant. That's basically what he proposed, and that is still remains the same. And so hence we know that there should be a dark matter. People have observed this in many galaxies, and we all seem to see the same feature: what is calculated and what is measured. So there is a discrepancy between them, and we don't understand the discrepancy. We only know that discrepancy because by adding the dark matter. But we know that we don't see them in the electromagnetic light. So hence these objects have a mass and they don't interact with light. That is the reason why we call it as dark matter, because they don't interact. Okay, so now with so many measurements, with so many observations, so what are the properties of dark matter? So the one thing which we know is that since the universe is 10 to the power of 14 years, 14 billion years, actually this should be it's not years. This is basically minutes, seconds. Fine. So it's it should be stable for 14 billion years, and it should not interact much with any other form of matter. If we would have interacted, then they would have interacted with light, and we would have been able to measure them, because we have very high sensitive measurements. We don't measure them. So except for gravitation. So that is how we see it, because we see them that we are able to see the rotational velocity and this contributing to the mass. Hence, we are able to see them. And they should have been produced in large numbers, because they seem to be available at every galaxy we see. It's not that some galaxies have it and some galaxies don't have it. So it is available in every galaxy. So they have been produced in large numbers in the early universe. So, and then the other important thing, which is also I will explain in the next slide. So, and they should be also able to capable of seeding the large scale the structures like the galaxies, super clusters, and things like that. And this I will explain in the next slide. So there are hundreds and hundreds of particles which can actually be part of it. I have listed only 3 of them. It could be axions, it could be weakly interacting massive particles. Then there is what is called the neutrinos, because neutrinos, we know that it has some mass, very light mass, but we know that, and we know that they also don't interact much with light. So these are the particles. These are the possible set of particles which we can examine, but we don't know which one actually is there. We still don't know anything about it. So the only thing we know is that these are the properties the dark matter should be there, and these are the possible candidates, but we don't know which of them is actually correct. Okay. So the one interesting feature, which also Professor Padmanabhan spent almost 10 years to understand, is basically is the large scale structure. I'll briefly explain this now, but I think tomorrow's lecture, Tirthankar Roychaudhuri will explain it much more detail. So we know that if I have a proton and an electron, let us say I have a plasma and there are proton and electrons scattered over. What happens is that since the unlike poles attract, then what happens is that they will get clustered. So if I have a proton here and then there is another proton somewhere here, then those two, the interaction will actually be not 1 by r, but it actually will be screened by a factor which is known as e to the power of minus k0r, or which is called k0 is called a damping strength, and this is what is called the screened Coulomb potential. This is happening because the proton and this another proton, which is also screened by another set of electrons, they cannot interact by 1 over r, but they will be interacting with a 1 over r with an exponentially Yukawa kind of decay. Fine. So unlike atomic particles, now these dark matter particles do not interact with charged particles. If they would have interacted, then of course we would have seen electromagnetic light. Since we don't see the electromagnetic light, so we should be saying that they don't interact. So hence they actually move freely, unlike other ordinary matter. So since they move freely gravitationally, then these dark matter actually can cluster very easily. In the sense they become larger because gravity attracts any form of this thing. So the dark matter effectively starts the structure formation in the universe. So this is basically they form the clusters, and actually this is some simulation which was recently done by this Chicago group, where they simulated starting from very large redshift, very heavy redshift, and they were able to see how different galaxy clusters are formed. So as I mentioned, tomorrow's talk by Professor Tirthankar Roychaudhuri he has actually extensively worked on it, and he will discuss about this part of Professor Padmanabhan's research. Okay, so now let us now concentrate on what is dark energy. Now, so we know that dark matter was a strange object because it is something is there, but we don't see it. It's like a what we call it as a black elephant, or a unknown elephant, which people call about. We see that there is a huge mass which is present, but we don't see them. But dark energy is something even more, we'll call it a much more bigger beast, or even more stranger object, because of the fact that it actually has a very strange features which we don't see them in the labs at all. We have not experienced it. So to get an understanding of it, so let me give an example. So this is a box, and this is a box of a container of gas particles, and we know that because the particles, these hit the walls of the container, and that's where they exert pressure on the container, and basically because of which there is a pressure. We call it as pressure, right? Now, what happens if I increase the number of particles? Now, the number of times these particles will hit the pressure, will hit the container increases. So hence the number of times it increases, hence the pressure also increases. Okay, so now let us now go and to ask a question: what is dark energy? So the dark energy is something where the pressure is negative. So we have never experienced an object where the pressure is negative. And the reason why the pressure is negative, I'll explain this in the next slide. But what we understand is that if there is something like a dark energy, then it has to have negative pressure. And so we call dark energy any form of energy which has negative pressure. And that is how the current convention in the literature is. Now, the interesting point of dark energy is that if I have dark energy molecules, if I keep increasing them, in the case of normal matter, like what we see in the lab, then this pressure should increase. That's what we saw it in the gas in a container. Here it is actually opposite. The pressure actually keeps decreasing. Okay. Now, the most bizarre feature, which is also we see, is that unlike the matter, the total energy in the dark energy is proportional to the volume. So basically, as the universe expands, its total energy also increases, which is opposite to the other one, because if the energy expands, what happens is that the energy density actually keeps decreasing. Fine. Okay. So as expansion continues, so the distance between galaxies increases and dark energy dominates, and that's basically opposing the gravity, and hence you have an accelerated expansion. So this is how we know that this is actually happening. So this is the plot of the luminosity function as a function of redshift, and by considering what is called the supernova 1A, which is some kind of a supernova, and they measure the luminosity function for each of these supernova, and they have actually, these are the dots are basically the measurements, and these are basic the green, blue, and the red are basically the fitting functions of different models. Okay, so the only model, so if you look at the blue model where we have assumed there is no dark energy, that doesn't fit the model at all. The one which omega lambda is equal to 1, it fits, but then it overestimates the value. It overestimates the value. The one which is the green one is basically the one which is the best fit value, as we understand right now, and for which omega lambda should be 0.69. And here this omega m consists of both matter and dark matter. Fine. Okay. So what this basically tells us that if I have to explain these supernova observations, then the only way to explain them is by assuming that there should be some kind of matter energy, which is what we call it as dark energy, and that should have a negative pressure, and that should have a certain contribution, which is 0.69. So this is basically the Nobel Prize work of Rees et al., for which they got the Nobel Prize in 2011. So that's where I've taken this. There are much more better plots right now, and those are all even more better sensitivity than this. Fine. Okay. So we understand that there is dark energy, although it is bizarre to have a negative pressure. But there is, so first question is, what is the problem? Okay, so let us assume that there can be some exotic matter field which will be there, and what is the real problem with dark energy? This is one of the problems which Paddy actually spent a lot of time, and this is a picture which is taken on his birthday 4 years ago, where he was celebrating his 60th year. The cake had a lambda, and this is what lambda is usually called as the cosmological constant in cosmology, and this is the capital lambda. And so this was a cake to say that he has actually been spending a lot of time to understand lambda. And so this is basically, he was very happy to see the cake with the lambda on it. So okay, so what is the problem? So why can't it be a cosmological constant? Okay, a real constant which is just there all through, starting from the time of the Big Bang. Currently, what is the problem? So the problem is that let us assume that it is a constant, and we calculate it from fundamental principles. The problem is that it doesn't match with observations. The theory and observations differ by, I've just to highlight the number of zeros, I've just plotted them this. These are the number of, so this is like 10 to the power of 137 orders of magnitude, which is different between what the theory predicts and what the observation actually speaks. So theory is predicting much larger value of the cosmological constant compared to what the observations predict. Okay, so people have been spending time on this, starting from Zeldovich on this, about this problem, and but we don't have a real understanding of why there is a huge discrepancy between what is observed and what we actually obtain it from theoretical physics models. Fine, and hence it rightly referred to as the mystery of the millennium. Fine. Okay, so what is the nature of dark energy? We have no understanding. So is the dark energy static? It could be coming because of this Einstein cosmological constant, maybe because of what Paddy has been working on, emergent gravity. I think Professor Dawood Kotawala might explain a little bit of it, not much in detail, but he will explain some part of it. Now, is the dark energy dynamic? Is a new field varying, a new field which is like what we call it as like any other matter and dark matter? Is it any other field which is varying in space and time? We don't know, but there is a lot of research on basically explaining it, because it is better, because the fact is that since the universe is expanding, continuously changing with time, so it is difficult to assume something which is a constant, because everything changes with time. So hence it is natural that there should be something which changes with time. Hence that is the reason why people have been spending time on it. There is also other aspect which people have been spending time on, which people are interested in, what it is made up of. How does it look like? How does it behave? Whether it is behaving like a spring, or does it stretch? Does it shrink? What does it do? So those are the properties which people are interested in. People have been also interested in whether it interacts. There is a dark matter and dark energy. These we are calling it as two separate entities. Do they talk to each other? Because they are living in the dark world. Maybe they are interacting, like how radiation and matter is interacting. Maybe they interact, and we don't know what are they. So there is a lot of effort. With one of my students, we have been spending some time, and that is a thesis topic also, on looking at interaction between dark matter and dark energy, and seeing whether we can explain certain some fundamental questions based on that. Okay, there is another thing which is also which people have been working on in the last few years, including me. We don't measure dark energy directly, like how we don't measure dark matter directly, because dark matter don't interact with electromagnetic radiation, so we don't see them. We only see them by interaction with gravity. So similarly, we don't see dark energy because it's dark. It doesn't interact with light or electromagnetic field. So we infer them from the Hubble diagram, which comes in because of the fact that they are contributing to the energy in the Einstein's equation. So what people have been wondering, and including my group here, is that if I suitably modify general relativity in largest possible scales, can it mimic dark energy? Okay, so basically the Einstein's theory, maybe not exactly G mu nu is not equal to T mu nu, as I said in the previous in the one of the earlier equation. Maybe it's approximately the same, but there can be some fine tuning which has to be introduced. And one possibility is models like some nonlinear Ricci scalar, which could actually possibly explain it. And we have been able to show that this can give you the correct late time acceleration, and it can have interesting features in observations, in the future observations, basically. This is also with the same student. Fine. Okay. So let me just highlight what is the problem which we are facing with the measurement of Hubble constant. Now, people have been measuring, as I mentioned, there's a lot of effort to understand the Hubble parameter, or the Hubble constant, sorry, it should be Hubble constant, because that tells us what is the age of the universe, and that decides a lot of things which we have to understand. Fine. So hence there is a lot of understanding. So, but there is a tension between the H0 values obtained from CMB measurements, especially from Planck and others, as well as from the supernova measurements. What we see is that, and we also have a measurement now from the gravitational waves. After the people saw the neutron star binary collision, they are able to get a Hubble constant also from the gravitational waves front. So what they find is that the supernova measurements predict H0, which is larger than H0 from the gravitational waves, and which is larger than it is actually pretty large now, as we see here. So as we see here, this is the measurement coming from these three measurements, and one of them is showing here, one of them is showing here, one of them is showing somewhere here. Consistent with each other. And people are trying to resolve this for a long time. The last 3 to 4 years, there is an extensive amount of literature. If you type in Google H0 tension, you will see hundreds of papers in Google Scholar as well as in Inspire. And people are thinking that there must be either it is observational errors. People have been trying to see whether there is any error in the observation in either of these observations. Or people are trying to introduce the self-interacting neutrinos. That is another possibility. People are thinking that maybe neutrinos are contributing to this. And people are thinking that maybe we should extend the what is not the current Big Bang model to another model. Also, we are thinking about dark matter, dark energy interaction. That seems to have one potential way of thinking about it, because we have really zero information in the dark world, the dark matter, dark energy world. We have no information. So that is one possible way of actually thinking about it. Fine. So I'll come back to the slide just to explain. So there are lots of efforts which are going around, like all these, the blind men, when they looked at the elephant. So we are actually looking at an elephant, which is the universe. And our universe is basically, and we are all scientists working on different aspects of it. And we are thinking that each of them is basically that. But we might actually be not any of them may be true. This is one of the reasons why Paddy actually was very excited about this emergent phenomena, because he studied all these things and he found that maybe none of them actually is the answer. Okay, so he spent a lot of time in this for the last 10 to 12 years of his life. He spent a lot of time to understand this using emergent phenomena of gravity, because he thought that each of them is not able to solve this problem, and hence maybe we should look at it slightly differently. So maybe it's like Olbers, as I mentioned, he had a conjecture and he didn't have an answer, but maybe in the next few decades, maybe there will be an answer to understanding this. Okay, so let me conclude with what I discussed. The standard model of cosmology, which we call it as a Big Bang theory, which is successful. However, it comes at a price. It consists of close to 95% of unknown matter and energy, the dark matter and dark energy. We need observations to need an explanation from a fundamental physics, but we don't have any explanation from fundamental physics. This is actually a very deep history. And we also need theoretical models to explain this exotic matter or modifications to gravity. So these are the exciting and interesting and exciting problems for students to take a shot at. So this is an interesting thing. There was a conversation which happened in Twitter after when Paddy passed away. So this is by Alan Evans, who is a cosmologist. He mentioned that when there was a conference which he attended in Ayuka in 2011, Paddy actually was giving a talk, and he said that the less we understand, we write more papers. And then there is a faculty member called whom we refer to as Kandu. He wrote he asked Paddy, how many papers do you write? So Paddy said, I write many because I understand very little. So this actually also goes back to Feynman, whom Paddy kind of revered a lot. So Feynman actually said that I would rather have questions that can't be answered than answers that can't be questioned. I think I'll end this with this. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you so much. You have explained very well the concept, starting from why night sky is dark, and you have explained various standard models of cosmology, also about matter, dark energy, various theoretical models which could explain these phenomena, and finally the elephant example, which was so fitting. And also, I have taken a lot of effort to explain this complex process in a popular science lecture fashion. So thank you for that. Now, maybe it is open for interaction, 10-15 minutes, we can have interaction. So maybe any questions, please? Audience can shoot any questions, doubts, please.
May I?
Sir,
Hello.
Yes, please.
Yes, yes. Please introduce and kindly introduce yourself and ask.
Professor Shankaranarayan, I am Titus from CUSAT.
Yes, yes, sir. Please.
So what I want to ask is, there are some papers, or let me say, there is a paper by Subir Sarkar. You may know about that.
Yes.
The prediction of
Yes.
uniform
Cosmological
acceleration may not be right. So
Yes,
can
I
you
see the
comment
paper,
on that? Yeah, can you comment on that? Your opinion.
Okay. So the thing is, there is also a rebuttal paper by Rees et al. So the point is the following. There are several observations which are, so if you look at it, supernova 1A explanation is one possible way of looking at it, right?
Okay.
But we also have CMB observations. Okay, so if you want to, I didn't give the CMB data because since Sriram Kumar explained it yesterday, so I didn't want to take some time from that. So that if I want to fit the data of that, then I need a lambda. So I need to have some lambda, and it is
So
precisely the same set of lambda, okay, which is required to explain CMB as well as this. So that is, I don't think so. They refute that.
Okay. So I think they have analyzed only the supernova data, not the CMB data. The Subir Sarkar.
So there is a lot of So there is a lot of things about the supernova data which people have been talking about. The supernova data, people say that there is some contamination or some physics which we have not understood. Fine. So for instance, the way we measure the supernova is basically this. For instance, when the supernova forms, and then there is the light curve actually goes like this as a function of time. Fine. So there is if we don't know precisely where exactly we measure this curve. There is one possibility that we don't know where the luminosity profile is precisely where. Okay. So that's where now if you look at the literature, people have been trying to find other standard candles. People are trying to come up with other standard candles. Okay. Now, for instance, FRBs are people are trying to see whether one can use FRB. This fast radio burst is a possibility. People are also saying quasars could be used, but quasars are still again a problem because quasars are still cannot be considered as a standard candle, especially with the spectrum and things like that. So as far as I know, as far as I understand, it's a big paper actually. Also, the reason is that they have changed the paper quite a bit after when they first submitted it. They submitted the paper in the archive almost 2 years or 2.5 years before, and then got published only 2 months or 3 months back. Okay, so they've changed the paper a bit. The first time when I read it, but now I have not read it completely exactly what they've what different analysis they have done. But what I'm saying is that so just to reiterate what I'm saying is there might be a problem with the supernova data contamination, which is maybe there, that I have not denied. That's maybe the reason why we are having this H0 tension, possibly.
Is there any problem with the high redshift data and low redshift data? So we have to concentrate any one of these particularly.
That is true. So the thing is, okay. So if you look at it, there is supposed to have been a transition from dark matter to the lambda CDM. There is a transition should have happening around. Okay, it depends on the model which you're talking about, around 1.5 to 2. Redshift of 1.5 to 2. Now the question is, depending on the models which you are looking around, maybe people say sometimes it's about 2 point, but anyway, it doesn't matter. So roughly around 2, let us take the case that there should be a transition, for instance. Now, if it happens, so that we need to know really, we need to go beyond 2, so that we are really there or not. So that is something which is important. So we need to go to high redshift, but then the high redshift measurements are potentially will have a lot of errors because, as you know, the flux reduces drastically as you go to higher and higher redshift. So there will be noise should be present.
Fine. Can you ask one more thing?
Sure.
Please. Yeah. See, in most of the Padmanabhan's paper, he favored cosmological constant rather than a varying thing. So,
but he
can
also,
you tell me some?
He also worked on scalar fields, for instance. He also worked on other stuff. Fine. So the point is,
Yeah.
okay. So his concern was that scalar fields is another way of if you introduce a scalar field, we are introducing one more ignorance into number of ignorances we have about this. Okay, but as you know, the problem is as happens in the case of inflation. Inflation also can be explained by using a cosmological constant like a de Sitter, pure de Sitter, right? Now, but then the problem with inflation is that once inflation happens, if it's a de Sitter, then there is no exit from inflation. But we know that we have to have an exit. So hence there should be something changing or something should be happening. So this is, so of course, so in that sense we need to have something which is dynamical. That's what I mentioned also, that we need to have, so the one of the reasons which people think is that we need to have something dynamical.
That means if you want to connect the late acceleration with the initial acceleration, then there must be a varying thing.
So that is the famous Ratra-Peebles model, where they say that there is an inflation which happens, and there is an attractor, there is a something which happens, and then it comes along with it.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for your fine presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, Dattan sir, please.
First of all, let me congratulate for an excellent talk. As he rightly pointed out towards the end, the more we listen, more doubts comes. Very simple thing, I am not a physicist. Your question of why the night, sky is dark. Can we, whatever you have told the candle theory, can we explain to the common man telling that we are feeling it dark because sun is much away from us? Is it correct?
No, no, not that. There are also other stars which are there. There are when we see the night sky, we see millions and millions of stars, right?
But the darkness and the sunlight we found day and night, we call generally with the presence of sun setting and sun rising.
Correct.
How will you explain that?
No. This has nothing to do with it, right? When you look at the plot, let me go back to that just to clarify what I wanted to say. Yeah. So this is the sun. I am putting this, everything else other than that. I'm putting this to explain that this is how it is. But if I didn't have sun, then this is just there. But everything else is, it will not look like, it will be like uniformly bright at night. So if you just remove this part, but then everything else uniformly will be bright, right? It's like as good as the sun. That's what it is.
Okay. The second doubt is, as when we agree that the universe is expanding, a small doubt to which direction it expands.
It is expanding everywhere. It is expanding in all the three directions. It's not expanding in one direction.
If that is the case, the heavenly bodies like a star, while it expands and expands, will it not be after a long years, there will not be collision again?
No. Okay. So there is a different explanation for it. So there are that's what okay. So I need to go back to this slide a bit. Yeah, this slide. Now there are closer objects will have a gravitationally attraction. So they bind. So like for instance, we can ask the following question. So you think solar systems, sun and earth will also expand? No. That will not happen because the gravitational interaction which is there, which is between them, is much stronger than the expansion which is going to happen. That's where we are always approximately in the same elliptical orbit all through, right? For many years, for many centuries, many millennia now.
No, but that means the bodies which are under, gravitational attraction will not expand as such.
No. These are also gravitational bodies, but they are actually there is a kind of explanation which is slightly different. So this is always a confusion part in cosmology, because the gravity is supposed to tend to attract how is it happening to this? So the one way of thinking about it is that as we have a more and larger masses of galaxies which are distributed and very far away, what is going to happen is they are getting pulled away because there are also other objects which are away from us. So think about it like this. So there is a boundary. Every object is going to get attracted. Okay. So this is a very naive way of thinking about it, but it is not the correct physical way of thinking about it, just because I just want to explain it in a very simplistic way. So you have several. So you make a box of it, and then ask a question: what is the how within this radius they will all be stable, but then they will other objects, for instance these objects here, they will all be getting attracted to the other side. That's a very naive way of thinking about it.
So, but when we say that the universe is expanding, let us understand there is no boundary for the universe.
There is no boundary. Yes, I'm just putting a physical boundary for an imaginary boundary just to explain.
Okay. Now the last question is, we are worried about the global warming and such kind of things, and because of the human interaction with the carbon emissions and everything, etc. But with the expanding universe and the temperature increase, a portion, the universe also is responsible for the global warming, is it not?
No. They are not at all related. The timescales we are talking about is very large. We are talking about millennium. We are talking about 10⁶ years. Here we are talking about for 5 to 10 years, 100 years, for instance.
Even a small contribution, yes,
nothing, zero. It's absolutely negligible. No, it's absolutely nothing. Actually, if you look at if you go to the sky, slightly away from the solar system where there are not much, the temperature is 3 Kelvin.
Okay, thank you.
My name is Amy and I am studying in Standard 9. Can I ask 2 doubts?
Sure.
How is general relativity related to the Big Bang?
No. General relativity is the framework based on which the Big Bang theory was formulated. So it is like Newton's theory. I have Newton's theory of gravitation, which tells that how 2 objects get attracted, right? So if I have a Newton's theory which tells you that if I have mass 1 and mass 2, and if they are at a distance r, that will tell you that F is equal to G m1 m2 by r squared. That is the force law. That is the Newton's gravitation. Now, using the Newton's gravitation, we can predict how the Earth moves around the sun. We can get Kepler's laws. So it is in that same way. So there is a Newton's equations of motion by which we are able to derive, able to explain orbits of sky, or orbit of planets around the sun or other stars and things like that. So similarly, general relativity is a much better theory than Newton's equations, Newton's theory. And using the general relativity, we can explain the expansion of the universe.
Okay. So I have one more doubt, that how can we detect the dark matter?
So as I mentioned, we only know it by looking at how the stars are moving, how is the velocity of the stars around at a given distance from each other. And then we calculate this, and this is what is measured. So if you are asking a question, how do we know what properties of it? We don't know yet many things about it. Does it answer your question?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, Samkar. This is Mamta from Physics Department.
Hello, hi.
Hi. So I think it was very nice talk, interesting talk. So I have actually a general question. based on the expansion of the universe. And I think you explained already from the beginning of your talk, one of the slide you showed that if we go back in clock, then the universe we realized the universe was small, right? And that says that, okay, anyway, we all of us know that universe is expanding, then the expansion of universe is uniform as well as isotropic. But is it possible to just draw an imaginary line beyond which the universe cannot be expanded? I mean that what is the future prediction? Which what do you expect? Because it cannot be expanded.
Okay, so
yeah.
Cosmology is something which we are only looking at causal phenomena, right, in physics. Fine. So we are here the phenomena is the universe where we are living. Okay, so we can only go back in time. We can never go forward in time. So
but you can predict the models as you already mentioned that. Yeah.
So for instance, Professor Matthew asked a question, right? Titus Matthew asked.
Yeah. I think the similar kind of galaxies also they are going far away from each other.
So you have to measure. You have to make a measurement at a very fine measurements, so that we know what the theory is. Unless otherwise we know whether the model which we have is correct, we cannot make a prediction to the future.
Sure.
See, without Newton's laws of equations, how can we predict that the projectile motion? Right? So we precisely know the equation and we precisely know the mass, and then we precisely know how when I throw it at a 45-degree angle, what happens to the ball, right? So it's the same thing here. We have equations, but we have a missing links of the masses of these things. So those have to be fixed. Unless we fix it, we cannot make the predictions. So it's like if I have the equation, but if I don't know the mass, I will not be able to get the projectile motion.
Okay,
distance.
I see.
So we are having the same problem here. We are not able to know precisely certain properties of the dark energy and dark matter. And hence we cannot make a prediction for the future.
I see. Okay. One more thing, that actually in one of your slide also you showed that that universe radius of the universe, as it increases the temperature decreases. So do you expect that as universe expand more and more, then the temperature will decrease? It will be more cooler?
Yeah, but that is the universe. But these are basically the very outer space we are talking about, where it is 3 degree Kelvin right now.
I see. Okay.
We are not talking about the close to the sun. Close to the sun is extremely hot. 10,000 Kelvin. That's what I said, very far from sun. I mentioned it when somebody asked this question about global warming. That is very far from the sun, it is 3 Kelvin. So there is a difference between local properties and the global properties, right? When we do cosmology, we are only looking at the very large distance. What are the properties?
Yes.
We are not looking at the properties of the solar system. For us, it is actually a very small distance.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, Shankar. Very nice.
Any other questions, please? I hope there are no more questions. Pradeep sir, any concluding remarks from your side?
Yes, that is, today we are concluding our second day of the Professor Thanu Padmanabhan tribute webinar series. I think a very good presentation, especially the student of Professor, our beloved Thanu Padmanabhan, has been presented here. And tomorrow we can meet in the same time, in the same platform. So we may conclude with a formal word of thanks. Over to Ajit.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Request Professor K. Indulekha, Professor, School of Pure and Applied Physics, MG University, for proposing vote of confidence.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. We have just now listened to an excellent and illuminating talk on dark matters, dark matter and dark energy. And it is a fitting tribute to Professor Padmanabhan that we are having Professor Shankara Narayanan, Professor Padmanabhan's student, PhD student, enlightening us about one facet of his work, a very important facet of his work. So on behalf of Professor K.P. Sudhir, Principal Secretary, Science and Technology Department and Executive Vice President of the KCST, Dr. V.P. Joy, Chief Secretary of the Government of Kerala, Directors and Scientists of KCST, Dr. Dattan, Dr. Vijay Kumar, Dr. Rajit Prabhu, Professors and Scientists, and dear students. I thank Professor Shankara Narayanan for all of us for delivering this lecture in such an excellent manner, including all these nice videos. Thank you so much, Professor Shankara Narayanan.
Thank you.
We are indeed fortunate to have him, Institute Chair Professor at the Indian Institute of Technology, Bombay, taking some time off to talk to all of us and paying this tribute to Professor Padmanabhan. And I thank the KCST for thinking up this nice way of remembering Professor Padmanabhan's contributions. Thank you, everybody. And thank you for the audience for your active presence and your interested presence and all the good questions that we could hear much more so that Professor Shankara Narayanan could go beyond what he could just present in within 1 hour and give us so much more enlightenment and insight. Thank you once again. Thank you so much.
Thank you, madam, for your nice words of thanks. Yes, Professor.
Sorry,
Yes.
I see Professor Matthew still raise hand. I don't know whether I see it. I don't know whether it is just.
No, I have already asked him a question.
Okay, okay.
I have already asked a question.
Sure.
Yeah, that is previous.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Shankara Narayanan. Tomorrow, let us all assemble again at 3 p.m. Tomorrow, the chief guest to deliver commemorative lecture is Dr. Tirthankar Roy Chowdhury. He is Associate Professor at the National Center for Radio Astrophysics, Tata Institute of Fundamental Research, Pune, and Honorable Vice Chancellor of Cochin University, Dr. K.N. Madhusudan is presiding over the function. So once again, invite all of you to be present tomorrow at the same time, 3 p.m. Once again, thank you all. Thank you, Professor.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Bye-bye.
And I thank our Vice Chancellor for presiding over the meeting. I forgot the nice speech which he had given. So I thank Professor Sabu Thomas for presiding over the meeting. Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye. I can leave, right?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Bye.